So far, we've had quite a lot of wrong ones thrown at us, and I believe Dan has answered them quite well. Uh, so we'll begin this show with Mythbusters today. Hello and welcome to everyone to this fourth episode of Wrong Ones with Weston. A couple of Mythbusters this time, just like last time, and the starting Mythbuster is that captain is the first person that you pick while building a T20 side. Dan, I want to know your thoughts on that.
I know that some people have done some work on the value of captain. So someone I've spoken to about this is a guy called Jack Hope, who's on Twitter, and he reckons that MS Dhoni saves around 3 runs on average for CSK when he's captain. So that's 3 runs for a genius. Probably an unparalleled T20 captain. So if he's at 3 runs, what's everyone else? Like it's not significant for sure. And generally speaking, I mean, I've had experience of working with various captains, and everyone's got their own individual style. But it's pretty rare to see one that I would really define as a tactical genius. And I would say that on the whole, 90% of captains are in kind of that neutral ground, if you like, where it's like plus or minus 0, and then sort of 5% are geniuses and 5% are very, very bad. And if you're adding some slight value as a captain, that's probably a really positive thing. But obviously, if you're only adding, like, say, 1 run per innings, that's not really something that you want to be particularly cognizant about when you're building a team. And you certainly don't want to overvalue it in terms of the financial cost of the outlay for buying a player. Even in recent IPL auction, we've seen players being bought maybe at a premium price because they offered that captaincy skill set, or they had been, or as opposed to skill set, perhaps just a kind of experience as captain. And that's something that I've been quite keen to guard against generally. Now, as the advent of analytics gets more and more into cricket as well, I think that we're going to see the best captains are going to be the ones who have a great relationship with analysts as well. So we've already seen that when Owen Morgan was captain of England, and I'm sure that there's probably going to be some more examples of this moving forward as well, where a captain who's very, very willing to buy into the analytics side of things is going to be the ones who benefit the most, rather than the ones who do it on the fly, really.
Just one question that I want to ask on this front. One, just to be absolutely clear, so that there's absolutely no confusion for the viewers. When you say that MS Dhoni is saving 3 runs, you mean 3 runs through his tactics and strategies, and not just as a keeper.
He has a value of +3 to his team compared to the average captain. Yeah.
Okay. The other question is, now this brings me to the IPL auction. Now, when KKR went into the auction, they didn't really have a captain, and they said that when they went for Shreyas Iyer and bought him, they also added the fact that they were looking to buy a captain. Now, he was bought, if I'm not wrong, for around 12 CR. Do you think that cost was justified, given even if you consider the kind of batter Shreyas is, or do you think that it wasn't justified and it was probably a little too high?
No, I don't think it was justified, Gokar, actually. The kind of skill set that Shreyas Iyer brings in terms of anchor batter and an unproven captain, yeah, maybe he's got age on his side as opposed to, say, like a Faf who would end up doing the captaincy job at RCB. But on the whole, I don't see that as a package worth paying 12 CR for. And I think that he was very overpriced at the auction. And although saying that, I did have a suspicion that he might have gone for even more, but I think that would have been obviously even worse value than the 12 that he was actually bought for. So I kind of was surprised he didn't go for more, but that would have been horrendous value, even worse than the value that was paid for him. I don't see that he offers a skill set which is a rare one worth paying big money for.
So I mean, I'm sure CSK fans would love to see that analysis and definitely won't agree with. I mean, we're definitely not going to agree with him saying only 3 runs. But yeah, I mean, let's leave MS Dhoni aside, because he is, as you mentioned, he's a one-off. He's a genius, and it's just, I mean, there are plenty more attributes that he brings onto the table, and then just saving runs as a captain. But I mean, we have seen a lot of examples where team are sort of stuck with a player just because they have the captain. I mean, moving aside from IPL for a while, if you talk about Kane Williamson's form right now, or even Aaron Finch, about whom we'll touch upon later, I mean, they sort of start becoming a liability because you made certain person a captain. So does it really matter?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another really good example, I think, Smash, is that we do see that teams are wedded to those captains, even when they're either, to be polite, in a bad run of form, or be more accurate, possibly in long-term decline. And we also saw it a bit with England, with Owen Morgan, over the not too distant past, and we saw that, I think, when he was at KKR as well, in that he had a really bad run of returns with the bat, but was still captain. And I think that's also the inherent danger of an overseas captain in the IPL as well, is that you're going to have an overseas captain. That guy's got to be someone who is a superstar, who ultimately is always going to play on merit as one of your 4 overseas players. Otherwise, you've got some real problems with team combinations if that player has a bad run of form, for sure.
So, like, if you were to construct a squad, right? So is it fair to say that choosing a captain will be probably the least of your priorities, and choosing players which are specific for phases, or the ones that add probably more than one dimension to the 11 will take priority over them?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's something that I wouldn't consider, but it's something that I think is, I wouldn't, as I say, I want to overpay for. And if you've got players in your squad who have got leadership experience, for me, that's probably good enough. Especially if you're running quite an analytics-heavy team and you expect that buy-in from the captain, then I think that's good enough for me. Certainly, I do feel that there was plenty of opportunities to go down the overpaying for captains route in the recent IPL auction, and that was something that I was very, very cognizant of when I was doing my pre-auction preparation. That it was, I just didn't want to do that. Basically, I didn't want to pay big money for someone just because they're captain, and that was, I guess, part of the reason why we went for Mank at PBKs. I think, which we were all on board with, actually. To be honest with you.
Another thing that I want to ask is, given you've mentioned that teams have become more analytics heavy, but like you mentioned in one of the episodes, that somewhere you also need to account for the changes that might happen in the game, which are unforeseen, right? So on that front, who do you, maybe 3 names as players who have been captains that you feel that actually add some value in that regard, where they are flexible enough to use their own smarts and counter some situations that wouldn't have been planned for? MS Dhoni is one name that you've said, but apart from MS Dhoni, any other 3 names?
Yeah, I know about three names that I can think of, because I think it is such a really rare skill set. But I've been really, really impressed with the captaincy of Moeen Ali over the last couple of years at Birmingham Phoenix, and also we've seen him captain of England recently in the series against Pakistan as well. I found him to be really, really quite tactically astute, and as you say, quite flexible about getting those good changes in which are needed to be done as the game progresses, and stuff that perhaps you can't plan for too much in advance. I felt that yeah, he's been super strong, and I've been really enjoyed working with him so far.
Okay, so moving on to the next Mythbuster. So Dan, I read a tweet a couple of weeks back when Cameron Green was going gung-ho against India. That was a tweet by Paul Dennett, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So he said something that I've heard quite often in the past as well, that T20 batting order should largely be who do you want facing the most balls, and he actually listed down 11 that Australia should go ahead with. Your thoughts on this?
Personally, it's not something that agree with or that I like that lineup at all. I mean, we're going to go on later to talk about the Australia World Cup potential lineups and squads and what I might have chosen. But that lineup in particular, I mean, where's the bowlers? There's only 3 frontline bowlers to start with, and that's way too few to go into any T20 match with. With regards to the order, could Warner go from ball one as a finisher? I'm not too sure. How good would David be against a potentially moving ball from high quality paces up front? That's a big question mark as well. So for me, and moving on to what Paul says at the bottom of his tweet regarding matchups, left-right handers, finisher, MS Dhoni saves around 3 runs on average for CSK when he's captain. Even in recent IPL auction, we've seen players being bought maybe at a premium price because they offered that captaincy into to batters. Will tell you the actually left right hand batters and combos do mean a great deal, not just also in terms of the matchups against those spinners, for example, but also if there's a short boundary on one side and you've got a left and right hander together at the same time, you've always got someone who can target the short boundary. So an astute pairing, for example, might look to get the person on strike who can target the shorter boundary easier at all times. So having that flexibility with left right combos for me is actually really, really huge. With regards to, say, like openers and finishes and stuff like that, and again, I disagree. I find that some players, for example, are very, very good at piercing the gaps in the power play when there's fielding restrictions, and you probably wouldn't want those players as a finisher when you've got a demand for more 6 hitting, clearing the ropes with maybe 45 fielders on the boundary a lot of the time, and these are things that you definitely have to consider that, and these players have different skill sets for sure. And also some players are kind of programmed differently in terms of understanding that risk reward. And if, say, for example, going back to that 11 that Paul suggested in terms of the Australia team, Tim David wouldn't play the same way, I don't think, if he was an opener, as compared to if he was coming in at number 6, which is his role pretty much, or his entry point might be, like, say, 14 or 15 overs or something like that, where he can just go and tee off and play his game. How much responsibility would he feel he needed to show if he was opening the batting, for example? And I do feel that just playing players in their best role and playing players in a role that suits them is really the minimum that you can do for a player in terms of roster construction and what you can ask for them to do. I mean, if you're asking a player to play in an unfamiliar role, I think you're almost setting them up to fail, if you like. And I'm very, very strong on playing players in the right role.
Fair enough. Now we'll move on to the second Mythbuster of the show, and then that is about people saying that white ball formats will eventually end up finishing the red ball format. Mm-hmm. That's the myth. So I want to know, what are your thoughts on this particular statement or this particular myth?
I think it really depends on your point of view, really, as a fan of what you want to see and how you want to see the future of cricket develop. Personally speaking, I'm fairly time poor, and when I'm watching a match, I want more instant engagement with a result to be decided within a reasonable time frame, as opposed to, say, waiting 5 days for a result. Growing up, I did enjoy Test cricket a lot more, but then that was all I had available to me. I didn't have a choice as a consumer to watch different formats so much. Now, I think it's also very, very important to be aware of the fact that the vast majority of countries lose money playing Test cricket, and they lose money with the domestic 4-day structure as well. And so to sustain a longer format, it needs to rely on money from shorter formats somewhere else. And so you have to have this kind of uneasy balance, if you like, if you're going to try and preserve longer formats. And the problem is that now all the money is going to the shorter formats, and all the players are kind of very, very aware of that as well. And I think there's going to be scenarios soon, and we're starting to see it a little bit already, but I think it's going to become a lot more widespread, where players reject central contracts because they want to go and play overseas leagues all the time rather than play for the national team in like a longer format. And then people will say, okay, well, what about NOCs and things like that? Well, for me, an NOC is not far off when it could easily be judged in court as a restraint of trade anyway. It's certainly in an English court, I think that would be definitely challengeable. And so what right does a national board have on a player who's not centrally contracted? I think that would easily be challengeable in court. And so we're gonna see these kind of things be tested very, very soon. Is what I'm anticipating in the next 5 years or so. We're seeing a real acceleration already in terms of players prioritising in T20 franchise cricket, and the way the game's going, that's going to carry on go. That's what's going to carry on going. If T20 takes over the sport, I'm fine with that because it's financially viable and therefore it ensures the longevity of the sport. But it will be a different sport to what it was even, say, 20 years ago. Everyone's got different points of view, I'm sure of that. But for me, it's logical that people are going to gravitate, boards are going to gravitate to what makes them the money. Fans are going to gravitate towards what gives them instant gratification. And ultimately, that's probably short format cricket.
Okay. Ignoring the economics aside for a moment, and let's just talk about skill. Do you think the skills that are needed for T20 cricket will essentially will not be? We'll just take the red ball cricket out of the equation completely.
Yeah, so you look at the skills required to be a red ball batter compared to T20 batter, and they're completely polarized. One format relies on wicket preservation and will pretty much never be a bad thing if a batter bats slowly and doesn't get out over, say, a few hours or whatever. Whereas in T20, that's an utter disaster. And the skills required are completely different in terms of the power, the intent, your shot making ability, the demands to try and play 360 degrees, etc. They're all completely different skills. And if you look at the best batters around the world in Test cricket, the traditional best batters, Root, Williamson, Kohli, Azam, whoever it might be, like those got the players of that ilk anyway. They are all anchor players in T20 cricket, and that's because I don't think they have the skill set to play that more expansive style anymore, and that's because they've spent a lot of time playing longer format cricket, and we're going to see this diversification of the formats, and I think that's absolutely fine because workload management, at least in England, I don't know about in other countries, is a real hot topic right now, and if that means that you can only play two formats because of ability, then that almost sorts out the workload management for you as well.
So, Dan, you mentioned two points. One was obviously that the Test cricket, that the format of Test cricket relies on shorter formats to bring in the money, which allows the boards to host Test matches. That is one. And the other said that you think that in the next 5 years, T20 will probably become the primary format. Now, one question that I have is, do you think that Test cricket will probably become an elitist format in the sense that only 5 to 6 countries will end up playing it? One. The other question is, do you also think that T20 will allow cricket as a game to become far more global sport than what Test cricket did? Because it's a shorter format, it probably allows for a lot of skill sets to be covered, like the gap in skill sets to be covered in a very short duration. So I just want to know your thoughts on these two things.
Yeah, number one, I think that will happen in terms of the elitist, and because we know that only the bigger boards really make money in Test cricket, so it makes logical sense for that to be the case. If you're a small board, we're already seeing. So, for example, like Ireland, for example, they've got Test status, but they don't really play many Test matches because it's not financially viable for them. So how can the game develop in that environment? You can't really do that. Whereas, as you say, in T20 cricket, there's less barriers to entry if you're a country. If you want to hold a T20 match and it takes 3 hours, then you can get a crowd, then you can start making money at it straight away. As a board, and there's, I think, less of a skill set gap as well in terms of, it's easy to set up a T20 domestic league, but it's not that easy to set up a 4-day league from scratch, for example. And we're kind of seeing that scenario develop a little bit in America, where all of the leagues are kind of focusing on T20 cricket rather than longer formats. So you can see how perhaps a well financially backed new country might make that route into challenging the traditional teams in the future. I want to see more countries play cricket, and ultimately, if that means the Test cricket goes by the wayside because T20 is becoming more prevalent because there's less barriers to entry for countries to play T20 and get to a decent standard quickly, I think that should be a positive. I mean, who wants to see the same teams compete time after time after time after time? I want to see like a bit more jeopardy. I want to see a big country struggle to qualify for a World Cup like you do in football, for example, sometimes. And that's because, teams have, over the last 20 years in football, have got a lot better. Some of the smaller teams have got a lot better, When I was growing up, I remember like England playing Turkey, and it would be like 8-0 to England when I was like 7 years old or something like that. And then 20 years later, Turkey would probably either draw or beat England a lot of the time, So these teams can really accelerate their development very, very quickly, and which is great to see. And I want that to happen in cricket as well.
Yep, and we might very well see it, as we discussed during the West Indies episode, that they still have to qualify to the Super 12s, and they might struggle to do that. Yep. So coming back, the question that I wanted to ask you is, assuming T20 will survive, and if you can save only one of Tests and 50-over format, which one would you rather want to save?
I would rather save the Test format and have it more polarized, because we've got the tradition, the pomp, and you're going to have more fans who are kind of ardent supporters of Test cricket than you are of a 50-over cricket. And I just think 50 overs is almost like this kind of middle ground that doesn't really tick either box, if that makes sense. It's kind of, just like a non-ideal solution, really.
Some teams see it as a shortened Test, some teams play it as a longer version of T20. Exactly. So, I mean, no one has the same approach, Yeah,
and it's just kind of like doesn't solve anything, really.
Yep. So, Dan, before we move on to the team of the day for Road to the World Cup, I'll just harp back to the second Mythbuster when we're discussing the batting lineup, so as to the player with the highest strike rate, so to speak, gets to face most balls. If you were to pick one player, active or inactive, one batter rather, who's the most flexible to play any role, who would that be?
Well, to do that, you're going to need someone who can play pace and spin well, and you're going to have someone who can probably bat anywhere in the top 6. And while he might have a slighter weakness against leg spin compared to other bowling types, I think I would go down the AB de Villiers route personally. For me, it was, whenever I did statistical analysis on AB de Villiers playing at IPL, it was so evident that he was in a class of his own. One of the few players who can hit a high boundary percentage without trading off stability, which is a real mark of a T20 great. And for me, that would be the player I'd choose.
Yeah, inevitably, AB de Villiers is always the ultimate unifier. No matter how many polarized opinions we see, but everyone tends to agree with AB de Villiers. Okay, so with that, we'll just move on to the next segment, which is the Road to the World Cup. And our team of the day is Australia. Cool. So, Dan, your first thoughts on the Australia squad?
It's an interesting one because prior to the last World Cup, I felt that they had a lot of holes in their squad, and they ended up winning the tournament. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean to say that I was wrong. I think that it means that if you're a competent team and you're in a knockout tournament, then maybe 10 teams have might have a 10 or 15% chance of winning a tournament, and 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 times that actually does happen, and that's fine. You can be right, and that could still be the case. Now, looking at their squad this time around, it looks much stronger, and they've got home advantage, and they've got Andrew McDonald as coach, who I've worked with at Birmingham Phoenix, who I know is an extremely astute coach, and I think that's of benefit to them as well. So they've got a very much of a different setup now compared to the last World Cup, and I think things are a lot more positive for them in terms of their outlook before the tournament.
Yep, and I think the addition of Tim David only makes them stronger. As compared to the last World Cup.
Absolutely.
So, I think before we dive into the questions, let's just take your first 11, and then probably that will lead us to the actual questions that we want to pick your mind on.
Yeah. Okay. So this is based on the 15-man squad that they've picked so far. So there's no room for example, Cameron Green or Nathan Ellis in this. They're not being picked in that original squad. So I went, perhaps controversially, for Warner and Stoinis to open, assuming Stoinis is fit. Obviously, he's now got another little niggle that could be a problem for him. Mitchell Marsh at 3, Josh Inglis at 4, Glenn Maxwell at 5, Tim David at 6, Matthew Wade keeping at number 7, and then Pat Cummins, Kane Richardson, Josh Hazlewood, and Adam Zampa as their primary bowlers from 8 to 11. That does mean no room for Mitchell Starc, and it also means no room for Aaron Finch, I should say.
Okay, before we come to Aaron Finch, no Mitchell Starc.
Yeah, because I feel that he, at this point in time, he's a reputation pick. If you look at his numbers over the last so from 2021 onwards, I looked at this in advance of the show, and he's averaging 34 and an economy rate of 8.8 from the start of 2021 onwards, and that's not numbers which are particularly encouraging. And the fact that I think it's been about 6 or 7 years since he played a domestic T20 match in any country, is another concern to me as well. And again, we talk about workload management, and perhaps maybe it might be better for him to focus on longer formats, or if he wants to focus on T20, then maybe play some leagues. So that would be my advice. But I'm not sure that Australia will agree with me, but that's my take on it. And I've worked with Kane Richardson quite recently, and I was super impressed with him as a player and as a human being as well. So he slots in nicely in terms of being a bit more of a proven quantity at the moment in T20 cricket.
Now, you mentioned that this is only from the squad that has been picked, so there is no room for Cameron Green and someone like Nathan Ellis. So I'm assuming that if Nathan Ellis would have been there, you would have probably replaced him with Pat Cummins?
I would probably keep Cummins in because of the extra batting that he enables at number 8. So for me, it would be a shootout between Ellis and Richardson for that kind of the number 9 slot, or the extra pace bowler. And I'm super impressed with both guys. Also, just been talking about Kane Richardson, but Nathan Ellis obviously is really broken on the scene over the last year or two, and I really rate him quite highly. He has one of the highest percentages in my database of players who bowl power play and death combined. I think he bowls about 90% of his overs in the power play and death combined, which is very, very rare. So he's got that appetite for bowling the tough overs, and from people that know him well, people say he's got no fear, and he relishes those tough overs, which is a rare skill set and certainly a very, very nice thing to have. And he impressed me a lot in the summer playing in England as well, in both the T20 Blast and the 100. So for me, Nathan Ellis is someone that definitely Australia need to be working out how to integrate into their group in the long term.
Yeah, I'm just still struck at no Mitchell Stark, because I mean, not just Australia, a lot of other people will definitely not agree with you, Dan. I mean, all
Hmm.
of us in India were actually, especially after Bumrah got injured, were of the opinion that Australia do a pretty good job at preserving Mitchell Stark for big tournaments. But what you say is actually the quite opposite of it, that he's not had experience of playing in other T20 leagues, and that just goes against him.
About Cameron Green, right? So if you were to bring in Cameron Green in the squad, who would you have done it in place of? Would you have done it in place of Aaron Finch, or would you have done it in place of Steven Smith, and why?
I think you can do it in terms of probably either player, but I would pick him over Smith primarily. I mean, I'm going to be really honest with you. I don't understand why Smith is in this group. And again, we're talking about workload management and players who perhaps don't fit all three formats. And obviously, he's another player that I could have mentioned earlier in terms of those elite Test batters who are anchors in T20 cricket. From 2021 onwards, Smith is 21 average, 113 strike rate for Australia. He's not done anything really in T20 leagues for a long period of time either, and I don't really see he has the skill set to be an above average player in a high quality team in a World Cup. So for me, there's better options, and if that means that Cameron Green comes in for him, so be it. Um, Obviously, we saw Cameron Green also, and that doesn't mean to say that necessarily he'll play the same batting role as Smith. It just means that he takes his place in the squad. Obviously, what I feel might happen more is that you've got these perhaps in slight injury doubts over Stoinis and Marsh, and you could see easily that Green might come in for one of them as a bit of more of a kind of a like for like player, if that makes sense. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Okay, so I mean, if Cameron Green were to walk into the squad, he will be in your 11. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I think so because the impact that he had was just truly incredible in the recent series, and obviously he offers another bowling option as well. Although perhaps that's still in terms of his T20 skills very much a work in progress. Um, but he enables them to perhaps structure up a little bit differently, particularly if there's injury doubts over Stoinis and Marsh in their ability to bowl. That he could share, say, fifth bowler duties with Maxwell, for example. That would be an easy way of structuring it. And so, yeah, no, I think that there wouldn't be that much to lose by doing that. But well, apart from the fact that you lose your captain, because he would take Finch's place because you couldn't justify dropping Warner.
Yep. So that is probably, I mean, at least the last question from my end. No Finch. So who's leading that side, Dan? And not leading per se, just leading them to the toss, because after that it doesn't matter, like we discussed.
Well, it's a controversial take, but there's only one guy in that team who's got massive experience, and well, I suppose you could say Cummins does too, but for me, David Warner just given the captaincy.
Just something on the captaincy bit. What do you think about Maxwell as the captain? Because he has led Melbourne Stars in BBL
Yeah.
also. So what do you make of Maxwell as a captain? Because I thought in this IPL as well that Maxwell as a captain was a possibility that RCB could have considered with, rather than just going for someone like Faf du Plessis as a captaincy candidate as well. What do you feel about that?
I'm absolutely fine with that too, Karat. I think that there's, like I say, a captain is almost like, I think in this group in particular as well would be someone who's just almost leading someone doing the toss. You would like to think that there's a lot of preparation going on for these major countries in terms of analysis and meetings prior to the match and stuff like that. So ultimately, the captain will hopefully be carrying out the pre-match preparation and the plans rather than having a lot of independent thought. And yeah, I mean, I'm fine with Maxwell too.
Okay, good
Also,
that yeah, Gurkirat, good that he brought about that point about RCB. I mean, going back to the auction, and now that you've mentioned that Warner is a leader and something that a few of us at CDC also agreed with. Do you think RCB sort of did not make a wise call there, going in for Faf rather than Warner, who would have be a leadership option, B a left-hander in the top 5, and C obviously he's more of a value add as a T20 player than Faf du Plessis.
Yeah, agree with that, Samesh. And also, I think that Warner complements the skill set of Kohli a lot more than Faf would as an opener. So Warner, for example, obviously, as you say, he's left-hander, so you've got a left-right combo at the top, and then also you've got a better player of spin in Warner than Faf is. I think is fair to say as well. And so immediately, if you had say Warner and Kohli, then teams can't go for that the easy slow left arm option, matchup option in over one, for example, against a Faf and Kohli opening duo that perhaps was obvious as a matchup choice in the recent IPL. So yeah, definitely, I think there's a lot of scope for suggesting that would have been a better fit for
Kohli fans will not like it, but I'll say that Warner is probably even a better player of spin than Virat Kohli, because I checked his numbers against off spin. He doesn't get out to off spin. He has a decent strike rate, if I'm not wrong, against off spin as well, probably around 120, 125, but he doesn't get out to off spin either.
And that's his bad matchup, if you like, as well. So yeah, I mean, and you talk about Virat's game against spin. I mean, you can say it is quite a similar kind of scenario actually to Joe Root, in that Joe Root is known in England for being an excellent player of spin, but actually in T20 he doesn't strike at over 130 against any spin type at all. So you can be a great player of spin in a longer format, but actually that wicket preservation and lack of intent can be a liability in T20 cricket, and there's such a fine line in those trade-offs, if you like.
One last question with regards to Australia from my side. Do you see any particular opposition against or at a particular venue where someone like Ashton Agar could make it to the 11, or you see him primarily being a backup to Adam Zampa only? Because Australia also have someone like Glenn Maxwell, who's been able to bowl an over or two in the power play against the right matchup as well. So what do you think about Ashton Agar?
Yeah, I mean, his numbers have been very, very good for Australia over the last couple of years. So certainly as a kind of a bench player, that he would be a better option than most teams would be able to bring in off the bench. I mean, for example, England with Liam Dawson, I think Agar is a better operator than Liam Dawson, for example. And yeah, there's certainly scope for that. If it was me, I'd be looking at venues perhaps which are a bit more spin friendly, which ultimately you probably won't find that many of in Australia. But also looking at specific opposition weaknesses and which opposition are going to be weaker against spin, and have a lot of right-handers in the top 6 or 7 as well. So you'd be looking really horses for courses, very, very matchup oriented, and as I think I said on a previous show, you're not always picking the best 11 players. Is should be a fallacy. You're picking the best 11 players suited for the task in hand, and that can change. And in a 15-player squad, there should be opportunities for all players to play when the scenarios are right. Otherwise, there's no point in having them in the squad to start with. You don't want cover players. You want players with different skill sets who you can introduce at the right times.
So, say if Australia and England, if Australia meet India in the semis, right? They're anyway in the different groups, and if they happen to play at Sydney, which is one of the semi-final venues, would you be open to the idea of playing in someone like Adam Zampa for one of the bowlers or one of the all-rounders, because he can bat too? Ashton Agar.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be looking at the Rahul versus Kohli opening partnership, for example, or a top 3 of Rahul, Sharma, and Kohli. There's certainly scope to get early overs in from a left arm orthodox spinner in that. And it's interesting because we've seen recently, probably over the last month or two, this increased intent from India's batting, and if they bring that into the World Cup, which isn't necessarily a given, I'd like to see it, but it's not necessarily a given. you might want opposition teams might want to strengthen their batting a little bit so that they can go harder in chases as well.
Yep, I mean, talking about intent, even though India are playing with a higher intent and they scored 240 odd against South Africa in the second T20I, Keshav Maharaj still went for under 24 in his 4 overs.
Incredible, right? Yeah, incredible.
Yep. I think with that, we can move on to the third segment of our show, which is the Viewers Corner. And the first question that we have is from Shubh Agarwal, who goes by the handle Shubh Chintak. So, Dan, he goes on to ask, how do you divide phases of a T20 innings? Is it just the power play, middle overs, and the death overs, or you break it down further based on some subtle factors?
Okay, so I think that that's pretty accurate on the whole. I think that's how most people will interpret the phases of an innings. You can quibble a little bit about the death overs in terms of 17 to 20 as opposed to 16 to 20, which I like the 17 to 20 because it's 4 overs then potentially from 2 death over specialists, whereas a spinner might bowl over 16 a lot more than the later overs. But I think that's a small quibble, really. I think it's tough to break down the phases further. So, for example, early middle or late middle, some people have tried to use, but that's tougher because we've got to focus on usable sample sizes as well in terms of looking at recruitment and opposition scouting as well. And sometimes players don't have a big enough sample in certain phases, and there's plenty of other data that you can cross-reference as well as phase data to understand how players likely to play on a general basis. So for me, I think that's pretty accurate and generally pretty well accepted.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen lately some people divided into 4 phases. I've even seen people divided into 10 phases of 2 overs each. So I mean, every man to himself.
Yeah, no, not for me, that one.
No, but I think dividing it into 4 phases does make a little bit of sense because just after the power play 2-3 overs, teams are still looking to consolidate, and if they are, say, only 1 or 2 down by the end of 9th over, from there on, then they start changing gears, and they'll probably have a little high intent in the next 3-4 overs, and if they are still only 2 or 3 down going into the last 8, you can actually see that those death overs start to arrive a lot earlier than the 17th over mark. That's what I feel.
You're right. Yeah, well, right. And again, this goes back to how contextual and situational cricket is in terms of, people say, a number 4 is batter, but a number 4 could be coming in at 10 for 2 or 110 for 2. And those are completely different scenarios that a number 4 comes in at. And this is where you've got to try and apply as much context to stats as you possibly can. Otherwise, you could get led down some dangerous paths.
Yep, and I'm also assuming, Dan, I mean, further subdivision depends on the live game, whereas from a recruiter point of view or an analyst point of view, it is more on the historic performance, and that's where you need broader phase divisions because, I mean, 13th, I mean, you cannot just pick someone because someone does well in the 13th over or the 14th over because it largely doesn't make sense, right?
Yes, exactly that. Yeah, there's got to be kind of a broader perspective on that, and exactly that. Yeah, and that could be a lot of noise in just picking someone a 13th over specialist, for example.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next question on the viewers' corner. This question is by. This question is by. This question is by Vinay Manucha. He's asking you, among Big Bash, UAE League and South Africa League, which tourney you have high hopes from and why?
I'm going for the 2 new tournaments to usurp the Big Bash pretty quickly. For the Big Bash to succeed, my view is that it needs a full Australia player involvement and more overseas players in each starting 11 for that to really take off as a product, a high quality product. They've also got rid of a couple of the rules, the substitute rule, which I actually quite like. And I think we spoke about that recently as a potential game changer for the IPL if it's done right. And I also like the bash boost as well, which I'm very disappointed to see that the extra point at the halfway mark isn't now being given to teams, because there was so much value in teams actually really pushing for that extra point. You know, it was a quarter of the points available for the match, and teams would sometimes like disregard it even as a consideration. It was insane. So you know, if you were, I think 5 from 8 qualifying, you could probably win about 30% of your matches and have a good chance to qualify if you picked up the boost point more often than not, which is an insane scenario, but actually pretty accurate at the same time. And so, basically, from my perspective, I like the opportunity to have an opportunity to get a competitive advantage over your opposition, and I felt that those new rules did do that. And it's a real shame that they haven't been continued. With regards to the other leagues, I can't wait to see both of them. Actually, to be honest with you, the South Africa League, I like. And I like it in terms of the potential of the product, because the auction got me super excited for it. I was really taken with how much interest there was with the auction, and showed me that, you know, we've spoken, I'm sure most people spoke about it in the IPL. I know I have. You know, some people prefer the auction to the actual tournament. You know, like this is a real highlight. And again, the South Africa auction showed that the auction dynamic in terms of the recruitment side of things and building an identity for a squad is a fascinating watch for the casual supporter. And the UAE League as well, I'm really excited about that, because it's the first T20 league. We've seen it in T10, but now we're seeing it in T20 as well. The first T20 league where there's far fewer overseas restrictions in it than a typical T20 league. And that should make for a really high quality tournament, even if perhaps the 1 or 2 locals that you have to play are on of equivalent quality to local players in some of the other leagues. But the fact that there's going to be 9 overseas players and an associate player, where kind of some associate players have been like, they've circumvented the rules a little bit to some degree, I think it's really fair to say. Yeah, we're going to see a really high quality tournament, I think, regardless of that.
One thing that I want to ask you, Dan, a follow up question to this: do you think, you know, having like pretty much no restriction to the number of overseas players that you can have in your 11, does it really help in terms of improving the quality of cricketers who will play for UAE, or do you think it won't really? Because a very good argument that has been in favor of the IPL is that IPL has allowed Indian youngsters to mature and develop far quickly than what they used to earlier, right?
Yeah.
But for that is why, you know, a lot of people are for the argument that you should only have 4 overseas, because you have enough cricketers. And you know, if you start increasing that overseas limit, then Indian cricketers will not develop that much. So I want to know from you that how do you view it as as something that will actually improve UAE cricket or not?
And I think that this is where you have to go deeper and look at the objectives as to why a tournament has been introduced. You know, so in the IPL, for example, yes, I think it's been a real accelerant for development of young players in the Indian domestic player pool, who can then make the transition to the national team and improve India's performances in international cricket, which is fantastic. Obviously, now, yes, you're right. The format of the squads is probably not going to accelerate the UAE national team as much as the equivalent would do in the IPL for India. But I think that the leagues aren't necessarily set up with the same objective in mind. I mean, is this UAE league been introduced to benefit UAE cricket in terms of, you know, finding the new talent? Probably not. It's probably done just to make money, and you know, like that's you got to be realistic about it. I think we're talking about different objectives, even though I do really agree with you.
Yeah, or maybe perhaps they've found out a balance between actually making the tournament watchable and having sufficient local players in the different teams, and that's where they arrived at the number.
Yeah, I agree with that.
One last question in this segment of viewers corner. This isn't from any other viewer, but this is a question that is coming primarily from me, because from what I have seen is that I don't think that Pakistan really utilized someone like Shadab Khan, the batter. I just think that he probably has no business batting out of top 5 or maybe out of top 6 for the Pakistan lineup. And what we can continue to see is that he's probably batting at number 7, number 8. Last World Cup, he hardly got a chance to bat for Pakistan, and he was slated to bat at number 8. And this England series as well, he's hardly batted for Pakistan.
Now, there was a similar case actually when he played the T20 Blast for Yorkshire, and that he was just carded a bit down the order and didn't really have much of an impact with the bat either. And ultimately, I agree with what you're saying. They are underutilising Shadab Khan, the batter. Now, in advance of the show, because I knew we were going to be talking about it, I did some stats digging, and against spin in the last 2 PSLs combined, Shadab Khan scored the 11th most runs against spin across the last 2 PSLs. 29 average, 143 strike rate. Those are super impressive numbers. 17% boundaries with more 6s than 4s. I mean, you can't ask for an, if you've got an all-rounder in your team, that is unbelievable stats. And they're far better numbers than the middle order batters in their group. For example, Iftikhar Ahmed, 22 average, 97 strike rate against spin. Hyder Ali, 28 at 114. Asif Ali, 14 138. So he clearly is a superior player of spin to those guys, in my view. And in the strange absence of Azam Khan, who's another excellent spin hitter, I think he should be used as that designated spin hitter for Pakistan. Against pace in the last 2 PSLs, his number's not as good. 19 average, 144 strike rate. So it makes so much more sense to use him in that top 5 as a spin hitter rather than almost just as an extra depth option, sort of number 8 or whatever they might use him at.
Well, thank you so much for clearing that up. And I really liked how you gave the numbers of his contemporaries in the side, wherein you gave numbers of Iftikhar, you gave numbers of Haider Ali, you gave numbers of Asif Ali as well. So I think that pretty much clears up what I have been thinking all along. And I think on this note we can probably, we're still left with one question.
Yeah.
I just realized. So
Yeah.
this is probably the most
We
burning
have
question
some
of all.
we have some leftovers in the fridge.
Yeah, and perhaps the most burning question of all. Now, what's your India 11 for the World
Yeah.
Cup?
I mean, so just to rewind to what we discussed in the last episode, Dan is gonna give us his India 11 and also the India squad, which is primarily his. I mean, if he had the blank slate to pick any 11 that he wants from India, what would that be?
Okay, let's do this. I'm going to go for like a kind of a mixed bag where I'll pick the players from the current squad as an 11. So, and then I'll have a couple of bench options which might be a bit more left field. Or we're going to have to kind of talk a bit about Jasprit Bumrah being ruled out as well. I think that's fair to say. So I'm going to go with KL Rahul and Virat Kohli as openers. Now, that people are going to go, where's Rohit Sharma? I'm not a massive buyer of Rohit Sharma right now at this stage of his career, and I certainly worry about his numbers for MI at the age that he's at. And I think also you can't have those Rahul Sharma Kohli is a big problem potentially in terms of chewing up too many balls at the top of the order. And I think that also with the Virat's kind of quite negative style against spin early in his innings as well, I think Kohli at 3 doesn't work, and opening is by far his best position. And so I will go with those 2 to open. And that neatly shoehorns in Rishabh Pant at 3 to guarantee me a left-right combo at number 3, no matter what. And I think that's a perfect entry point for him. We've seen him do a lot of good things with that entry point around the 4 to 7 over mark, and I think that will. I don't want to see him play his natural game. I'm not, with no restrictions, no responsibility, no calling out on him if he plays an irresponsible shot. Go and be my match winner. That's what I want to go and see. And another match winner for Surya Kamayadab. I'm sure everybody is. You can't debate this one, surely. I mean, it was a travesty he didn't get. KL Rahul got man of the match over him yesterday, which was quite simple.
I mean, let's save the man of the match discussion for some other time. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's the commentators. They just watch this when their stint is on, and that's when they decide. I've seen this much, and he's my man of the match. I've not seen the rest.
No, I think you must be right. I don't know how this stuff works. Yeah, incredible. Hardik Pandya at number 5, 6 Dinesh Karthik, 7 Akshar Patel. Even though I'm not massively sold on him as a finisher, I think that he balances up the side really nicely in the absence of Jadeja. 8 is Harshal Patel. 9, because of the injury to Bumrah, I want the extra depth and the power play bowling of Deepak Chahar. Number 10 and 11 is Arshdeep Singh and Yuzvendra Chahal. That's my India 11.
Yep. So, one little change there. I mean, ideally Bumrah, you would have wanted Bumrah in the 11, but he goes out and Deepak Chahar comes in.
Yeah, which lengthens the batting a little bit as well, and gives more of a power play specialist. And we're going to be looking at Harshal Patel and Arshdeep Singh to have 4 overs at the death between them.
Yep. I mean, one argument that might be thrown right there is neither of Arshdeep, Harshal, or Deepak Chahar have played in Australia enough. But should that matter?
Yeah, I'm not a massive buyer of those arguments. What I would be doing if I was working for India and I had access to some real detailed stat stuff, I would just double check and I'll do a little bit more due diligence on finding out actually what works in Australia in terms of the style of bowling, what lengths, etc., and making sure that the players that I'm picking are able to give me what I need in that respect. But I'm sure that I think that these players are certainly good enough to be able to adapt to Australian conditions anyway, and I'll be very surprised if
also
there's a glaring issue there.
Who's your captain in the 11?
So we chatted a little bit before the show, and I think we're going to give it to Hardik Pandya after his great introduction to captaincy in the last IPL.
Fair enough. And what's your 11 from which will have players from outside the squad?
I don't think I'd change that much, if anything really at all. But I would probably change some of the bench players a little bit. I would be looking to try and get Sanju Samson into the setup very, 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 very quickly, and also Prithvi Shaw, who is more of an attacking opener by far than KL Rahul and Virat Kohli have tended to be over the last couple of years. And I like attacking openers. I want to take the game to the opposition in the power play, and for me, he's the premier attacking opener in India. I think you got to have a kind of a spin all rounder on the bench as for Akshar Patel. Although they're not quite the same type of player in terms of the type of spin they bowl, I think R. Ashwin, in the absence of Jadeja, makes a lot of sense. And as a backup pacer, I'm going for Avesh Khan as over the likes of Mohammad Shami or Umesh Yadav or some other power play specialist. I'm going to go for Avesh Khan, who I think can do a much more effective job as a top and tail bowler rather than the other guys.
Yeah, so coming back to your pick of Deepak Chahar to just replace Bumrah in the 11 itself. Now, Bumrah is one bowler that is seen as an all-phase pacer.
Absolutely, yeah.
He can bowl at any time. Do you think Deepak Chahar has the ability to do the same? Because MS Dhoni, the genius, has just used him up front up in 9 out of 10 games.
Yes, and I would do the same thing, actually. I agree with Dhoni's usage of Deepak Chahar. And I would probably look to primarily get 3 overs out of him in the power play or around that sort of first 6-7 overs. and then bowl him out by maybe over 10 or 12 or something like that. Because with this 11, you don't need any death bowling from him, because you've got two fantastic death bowlers already in Harshal Patel and Arshdeep Singh. So you have role clarity. You say, no, you're the guys I trust for the death. And come what may, even if your first term is in another phase don't go so well for you, you're our guys for the death, and you go and be our closers. That's how I would do it. You've got those guys in for their specific skills as death bowlers, and so you've got to trust them to execute their skills.
Even though you mention Harshal as a death bowler, his numbers for India in the death haven't been great. He's had an economy of more than 11. And you mentioned about Avesh Khan as well, who again hasn't had great performances for India. So does that worry you somewhere, or do you think it's probably an aberration and they still have the skill set?
A bit of both. Probably I lean towards more of the aberration than the noise thing, because we've seen them execute that skill set consistently in the IPL over the last couple of years. So for me, there's no reason to doubt them. And I think that what we're going to have to look at, and it's an uncomfortable conversation for some people, but I'm quite happy to have it, is that actually in a lot of cases I find that the IPL in particular, but not just the IPL, but some of the higher quality T20 leagues are actually of a higher standard than some of the bilateral cricket that goes on around the world in internationals. And so if you're performing game in, game out, season in, season out in the IPL, there's literally no reason why you shouldn't be able to convert that to international cricket. It would be a real strange one if someone couldn't do that.
Well, I suppose that's it for this episode, and you've actually sort of ended it on a very good note, where you've mentioned that the quality of the IPL is probably greater than few of the bilaterals that happen, and I'm sure that will stir up a conversation, because a lot of people I know will disagree with you.
Yep, and Dan, before we end the show, I mean, congrats to your move to Kent. Good on you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, really excited about that. So it's just starting now. So buzzing to get started, and really excited for the move. And actually, it's back to my home county. I grew up in Kent, and I went to school there. I went to university there. So kind of feels like I'm going home. So I'm very happy.
Yep. Maybe you can have a word with Sam Billings and tell him that running out the non-striker is okay. It's not that bad.
I'm going to see him in a couple of days' time, so maybe I'll bring that one up.
It's been another very insightful and intriguing show. And to all those watching, I just ask them that please do keep sending in your questions. We actually take your questions. And if you like the show, please share it. Please like, share, and subscribe. And do follow Dan on his Twitter profile as well. He's obviously coming up. He keeps coming up with a lot of these nuggets of pieces of information with regards to T20, which I'm sure will help you understand the format of T20 cricket much better than what you would otherwise.